I looked at the estuary and I thought, wow, this is beautiful, you know? And all these dead trees. I thought, wow, this is cool.
And I could never understand. They'd say, well, there was an island here or a duck harbor. And I'm going, what island? There's no islands.
It's been over a century since the Herring River estuary was diked and drained. Over all that time, this place has completely transformed.
So it took me a long time to finally visually get it. I realized that wherever the pine trees end, that should be open water, and that everything else in between, it doesn't belong.
As the largest salt marsh restoration in the Northeast, the Herring River restoration is truly groundbreaking. But working to heal an estuary that has been cut off from the tides for so long brings many complex challenges. So why do we have to invest so much work and time in restoring it? What would happen if we left the ecosystem as it is?
We have an estuary that is withering.
Because of the lack of tidal flow and the deterioration of peat over time, we have hundreds of acres of marsh surface that are subsided up to 3 feet.
We noticed the impact it was having in the Herring River by basically kind of elevating the water table behind the dike. And as the sea level rises on the seaside of the dike, it would very rapidly transition to much more flooding, and eventually the Herring River would actually become a large open body of water.
The water quality is going to continue to get worse for aquatic animals, including important mosquito predators. They're not going to be able to live here.
When we tidally restrict and impound a wetland, converting it into a freshwater wetland, it turns out causes it to emit substantially more methane to the atmosphere,
which is an extremely potent greenhouse gas, much worse than carbon dioxide.
We have an opportunity now to recognize that we could help restore the natural system that is suffering because of the presence of that road and those structures.
The return of saltwater to long-impacted areas presents a range of challenges, both to the ecosystem and the surrounding infrastructure. Scientists have been studying the Herring River system for decades and have designed a restoration plan that allows us to anticipate and respond to these challenges.
The Herring River project is based on an adaptive management framework, which allows managers to take existing data and new data and build that into the decision-making process.
Scientists first collected data to help us build a model to understand the functioning of the estuary and how it would respond with different levels of tidal openings at Chequasit Neck. As we slowly open tide gates, we are going to carefully monitor the system's response, and that information will be fed back into the model to inform future tide gate management decisions.
It's important to note that restoration is going to take time, and the Herring River estuary will go through a transitional phase before our restoration goals are met. During this phase, we expect to see freshwater vegetation die in areas where saltwater is introduced. Some areas may remain bare before plants have time to recolonize. We may see more opportunistic plant species colonize new areas of disturbance. We'll also be watching for drainage issues, as water may tend to pool in depressions across the subsided marsh plain. Although these events may look concerning, they are expected and temporary as the system readjusts to these new conditions. To mitigate these issues, we'll be taking certain management actions before we open the tide gates.
The project will remove freshwater vegetation prior to it being killed by saltwater, allowing space for salt marsh plants to come in and repopulate those areas. The Herring River floodplain has subsided over time, creating dips and rises in sections. Sediment will be redistributed through the area, leveling off the marsh, creating optimal growing conditions for salt marsh plants and allowing tides to flow freely through the system.
At this point, we'll begin to allow tidal flow back into the river. We'll start to see higher high tides and lower low tides. We'll see estuarine animals begin to recolonize. In wetter areas, microbial mats will begin to grow, helping to stabilize the sediment. Areas that drain during low tide will be colonized by salt-tolerant pioneer plants, like pickleweed, that help hold sediment and rebuild below-ground organic matter. Eventually, as the surface stabilizes, salt marsh grasses can begin to recolonize. Cordgrass creates a broad plain across the lower intertidal zones. Salt hay will create salt marsh meadows in the area above mean high tide. Over time, the salt marsh peat will build again as the roots and rhizomes of these grasses accumulate and trap sediment, allowing the marsh surface to regain elevation. As the salt marsh matures over the decades, we hope to see the formation of natural creeks. The river, which was artificially straightened, will eventually regain its natural sinuous shape. As the ecosystem recovers, we'll regain a host of benefits.
Prior to the dike, we know that herring was very important to the town of Wellfleet. They used to allow the harvest of over 200,000 herring annually. By allowing additional tidal water into the Herring River, we could restore potentially hundreds of thousands of fish back up to the spawning ponds.
That habitat is for, important species within the food chain that drive our economy.
We want to reclaim shellfish beds that were lost due to bacterial contamination.
The restoration is going to provide a huge advantage in the ability to control nuisance mosquitoes.
We want to regain the resilience of the marsh plain.
Reducing the impacts of erosion and waves on our built environment.
We want to eliminate the methane that's being emitted by ponded wetlands and regain the potential for the salt marsh to absorb carbon and help us address greenhouse gas emissions. We want to regain access for the community to a beautiful, healthy, vibrant system for recreational enjoyment.
The recovery of this complex and disturbed ecosystem won't be simple, and many of these improvements will take decades. The adaptive management framework will allow us to observe and adjust our approach as we see how the system responds. This way, we'll continue developing our understanding and stewardship of an ever-changing herring river. And what we learn here in Wellfleet will continue to inform coastal wetland restorations around the world.